Thank you, Emmeline, for helping us make that bumper video for our sermon series. Very great. Emmeline, where are you at? Thank you, Emmeline. I also want to make another announcement. This is some progress right in the middle of the pandemic. We're making progress, and Life Church has made a hire as our church continues to grow, and we want to continue to be able to just serve you better. One of the things that we've really needed is more organization, more administrative help. So we have hired an administrator. They've been in our church not too long, but you've already come to know and love them, Alex and Aaron. And Aaron, we've just hired as our administrator. If you'd stand, Aaron Popova, give her a hand. We're real excited. You'll be seeing her a lot around the building, helping us keep our act together, or get our act together, maybe. But anyway, we're excited about that. I'm really excited to have intermission in the house today. Yeah. Ow! For those of you who don't know, intermission is a ministry that is led by Pastor Chris and Nisha Irwin from the church. And intermission is a gap year program for young people. Sometimes some of them are just coming out of high school. It can be anywhere up to 25 years old, though, where they're discipled, they're sent on mission. So right now they're in their month of discipleship. And today we have Brooke and Tori and Anna and Anya and Joshua and Nate and Carlos and Lou and David in the house. Let's hear them for them. Yeah, great to have them. And so they're being trained right now. And I had the opportunity to be with them on Friday and hear some of the teaching that they're receiving. I'm just going to tell you, I was blown away. I mean, I love Chris and Nisha, and we've come to know them for a while. But to see them in their context and what they're doing with these students and the passion that they have in training up these young leaders was so impressive. And Carlos, one of the young men, when they went to Ecuador to serve as missionaries, he was just a little baby, really. In Ecuador when they first got to know him, and he grew up along with Chris and Nisha's kids, and now he's one of their students at intermission. I just think that's so great. So proud of all of them. We heard a great message this morning in first service. No pressure, Chris, but do it again. All right, so let's welcome. Hey, wait. So UT starts this coming, I think Thursday night. They're playing a football game, and we got to kind of get in that how we would cheer at Neyland Stadium, because this is bigger than UT football. Let's just welcome Chris this morning. Why don't you just get on your feet right now? Get on your feet right now and welcome Pastor Chris Irwin in the house.
Oh, well, thank you very much. That's a lot to live up to. Yeah, he insists on calling me pastor. He knows it. Yeah. Anyway, it is good to be here. It's great to have our students here, and you can meet them because over the last couple of years, those of you who are in the church here, you've heard about our ministry, but it's when it actually starts and they can be here that you can actually see some of the young men and women who have come to give a year of their lives, basically, to find out what God may have for them. And that's an exciting thing. And the series is Hope in the Dark. Hope in the dark. And we're going to be talking about that, and we're going to be asking a question, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Now, Carlos is here, and he'll know this. When we lived in Ecuador in South America, we lived in really the valley, well, not a valley, we lived right on the coastline of Ecuador, where it's very hot all year round. Where we were in a city of 4 million people. It was very dusty at the time. There weren't a lot of trees because it's pretty much cement everywhere, and very hot. Can I say that again? Very hot and very, very just the humidity. Knoxville has nothing on humidity, right? And one of the things we love to do is you could go from sea level, you could drive for 4.5 hours, and you could be at 14,500 feet above sea level, and you're on the valley floor. Like for 4.5 hours, you're just driving up, right? And you pass these towns with exotic names like Payatanga, where I would always buy choclo. I'd always buy this special type of corn. And then you would get up, and you would be on the valley floor surrounded by these snow-capped volcanoes with exotic names. You're on the valley floor at 14,000 feet. I would immediately have to take medication because the altitude would just give me a migraine. And you would be up there on the valley floor, and you have these exotic volcanoes with names like Chimborazo, Tungurahua. We had a friend who went up in El Altar, and we had a friend who went up, his son was a pilot, and they descended into the cone of the volcano in the plane and circled around. And he took tons of pictures only to find out these were the old style where he actually had film. He didn't load it correctly. So none of his pictures came out. But I love going to the mountains because in the mountains, when I go to the mountains, it's just easy to believe in God. Like, there's something when you're at the base of these huge mountains, you seem so small, and God seems so big. Like, it's an escape to go to the mountains, and it's a place where I feel God. And the air is pure, and the skies are clear. And it's easy to believe God when you're in the mountains. But we didn't live in the mountains. We lived in the valley, where life was hard, where it didn't always feel like God was present. I don't know about you guys. I don't know where you are this morning. We're talking about this message. What are you waiting for? One of the things we'll talk about with our students is there's a question that you should probably ask your good friends every once in a while. When you meet for coffee or you meet up with them and you say, hey, how you doing? And then you change it. After they answer, you say, yeah, how are you doing really? That one extra word. How are you doing really? If I could ask each one of you separately, and if nobody else was here and we were just seated and I just said, how are you doing really? I wonder what your answer would be. Because I'm sure if we ask people to come forward and share testimonies, some of you are experiencing that mountaintop life right now. Like some of you your walk with God is going good. He seems very present. He seems very real. You can talk about things that God is doing, and that would be an amazing Sunday. But some of you, if we ask you to come up there, you're not in the mountaintop experience right now. Some of you are in a valley, maybe the deepest, darkest valley you've ever been in. Your life may not be what you ever dreamt it would be. Maybe you're single and you've not met that person and you want to meet somebody, it just hasn't happened and you're wondering what the future holds. Maybe you're in a marriage that something went wrong a while ago and you don't know how to figure it out. Maybe you're back living alone again. I don't know your circumstances, but I want you to know whether you're on the mountain or you're in the valley, we've got to just make sure we don't commit a mistake. It's a mistake. We're going to read these verses, but I'm going to set it up for you. This is in 1 Kings 20. We're only going to hit it and then move on to what we really want to get to. But there was a situation in Israel where Ben-Hadad, who was the king of Syria, he decided to go pick a fight with Israel. So he came, and it says he came with 32 other kings and their forces against tiny Israel, and he sent them a message before he got there. He wanted to pick a fight. I don't know if you've seen anybody try to pick a fight. They're just going to pick and pick until they get it, and that's what he did. He sent a message to the king of Israel and all their leaders saying, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to come into your city, and you're going to give me all of your gold, all of your silver, and we're going to take your wives and your children. And Israel wrote back and said, okay. Believe it or not, they said, okay. But remember, Ben-Hadad is trying to pick a fight. So he writes again, King Ahab, the king of Israel, and he says, no, you don't understand. We're not only going to do that, we're going to come in and we're going to take every single thing you have. And the king of Israel freaks out with the leaders, saying, what is this guy's deal? We're trying to do, what he wants. But the prophet comes in and says, meet them in battle, you will beat them. And they scrambled together 7,000 soldiers. That's all they had. And they won. But then the prophet comes back and says, yeah, begin preparing for war again, because they're going to come back in a year. And that's where we pick up, and this is what we're going to read. This is what it says in 1 Kings 20, verse 23. Meanwhile, the officials of the king of Aram advised him. Now remember, this king Ben-Hadad just got his rear end kicked, right, with all of his soldiers. And so their advisors, officials are advising him saying, their God is a God of the hills. That is why they were too strong for us. But if we fight them in the plains, surely we will be stronger than them. The next spring, Ben-Hadad mustered the Arameans and went up to Aphek to fight against Israel. When the Israelites were also mustered and given provision, they marched out to meet them. The Israelites camped opposite them like two small flocks of goats, while the Arameans covered the countryside. Then the man of God came up and told the king of Israel, "This is what the Lord says. Because the Arameans think that the Lord is a God of the hills and not a God of the valleys, I will deliver this vast army into your hands, and you will know that I am God." Their big mistake was believing that God is just a God of the hills. He's just a God of those mountains, and he's not a God of the valleys. And I think we can fall into that same mistake. We can fall into that. We can be in a valley and think that only God, he's just not there. When you're on the mountaintop, when you talk to God, you feel like he's there. You feel like he hears you. You feel like he listens. When you're in the valley, it's the complete opposite. You don't feel connected. You try to pray, and it doesn't seem like he's answering your prayers. You may be a parent who's distant from a child. It doesn't matter the situation. We don't want to commit the same mistake to think that our God is not the God of our valley. We even read scripture that way sometimes. You remember the song? The psalm that says, "I lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence cometh my help." If that's how you grammatically read it, you're reading it wrong. Grammatically, it's, "I lift up my eyes to the hills," period. Where does my help come from? Question mark. My help comes from the Lord, the creator of heaven and earth. And so today we're going to be asking the question, what are you waiting for? What is it in your life that you're waiting for? And to do that, we need to go back and look at a special word that occurs in the Bible. There's a book, and most of my sermon comes from this book, 70 Hebrew words every Christian should know. And there's one Old Testament professor, and he says if there was one Hebrew word I would want every Christian to know, only one, this is the word, kavah. Kavah. Kavah is found in the Old Testament over 100 times. It's found more than the words for salvation or the word for fear or righteousness. It's a huge concept. In the Old Testament, it's found over 100 times. Or in Job, it's found the most than any other book. Kavah. Kavah basically means to wait. Why would this theme be the theme that seems to be above all other themes in the Old Testament? Wait, wait, wait. I've told the story before. I won't go into it for a long time. It's only happened one time. I was doing a fast in Ecuador. I was in this church. Every day I would pray, I would journal. Nobody knew I was doing this except for Nisha. And I would play my guitar and sing worship. And on the seventh day, massive migraine. I sat in this little dusty church we were trying to build, Torre Fuerte. And nobody knew I was doing this. And I had a massive headache. I tried to read the Bible. It wasn't working. I kept rereading the passage. Finally, I said, well, I'll play some worship. Nothing. And I remember just sitting there in that church, or in that church that morning, just going, hello, God. Hello. Can you hear me? Can you see what I'm doing? Does any of this make any sense to you? At one point, I even said, do you even exist? Don't ask me what I was thinking. It was just these things, and I just kept coming back to, do you hear my prayers? Do you see what I'm doing? And then I finally just packed it up and went home. And I walked in the door, and Nisha says, you need to call Sister Guillermina. Something's going on. So I call her. She gets on the phone. She said, well, Chris, every day I have my devotions. And this morning as I began to pray, I started to cry. I started to pray for the church. And I started to pray for you. And when I started to pray for you, I began to weep. And I didn't know why. And I asked God, what was going on. And he wants me to tell you something. I don't know how many times that's ever been said to you, But all I could think at the time is I just spent 40 minutes sitting in a dusty church building. If he had something to say, he had plenty of opportunity, right? But I couldn't tell her that, right? So I'm like, okay, Guillermina, what does he want? She says, well, I don't understand it at all, but here's what he wants me to tell you. He hears your prayers, and he sees what you're doing. But you're young, and you need to learn patience. I wish every time I had a prayer, Guillermina would call me. Never happened again. And I told her, Guillermina, I understand. Thank you. The truth is, waiting. Who likes to wait? If you look back in the Old Testament, remember Abraham and Sarah, desperate to have a child? God appears and says, I'm going to give you a child. And they had to wait 25 years. If you're single and you're still looking for that special person, think of the amazement if God or an angel appeared and said, I'm going to give him to you or her to you in 25 years. You don't know that, But then he announces it. How would you feel? Oh, how old would I be? When Moses went up on the mountain and he left the people behind to meet with God, they had to wait on him. The Jews had to wait for the Messiah generation after generation after generation. All through the Psalms, you have the same refrain, wait for the Lord, wait for the Lord, wait. If somebody's writing those things back in the age of papyrus, right, with ink or whatever they did it with, and they're writing continually, wait for the Lord, it probably means that those who are going to read it are not good at waiting. Abraham and Sarah got tired of waiting. She eventually said, take the maid, sleep with the maid, and maybe we'll get a son that way. The children of Israel got tired of waiting for Moses, so they built their own god, a golden calf, when he didn't come back. The Jews waited for the Messiah so that even by the year 125, this is decades and decades after Jesus came and left, they put their hope in another false Messiah, and the temple was destroyed again. The Jews were not good at waiting, but they're not really different than any of us. Like, how many of you like to wait? How many of you like to wait? I've spent some time in the doctor's office this week, in and out the last 2 weeks, been having some issues. And I'm going in there. What's that room you sit in? What's it called? They've renamed it. Let's be honest. They renamed it the reception area. It's a waiting room. Nobody likes to be waiting in there. And then Friday, when I was waiting to go into a metal tube where they're going to look at stuff, I'm in this thing for 30, 40 minutes. They call my name, and I'm like, yes, I've got things to do. And they walk me through a hallway into another waiting room. I had to wait some more. Like, nobody likes to wait. Have you ever been to an amusement park? You're going to go have fun? Next time, tally up the amount of minutes waiting compared to the amount of minutes you actually spend on the ride. Like, nobody likes to wait. Imagine if I told you today they're going to lock the doors, and for 6 months, people bring food. But that's it. This is us. 6 months of waiting. That is what they say is the average amount of time a human spends waiting. 6 months. I Googled it. It must be true, right? So, nobody likes to wait. But it's part of life. It's part of life. Everyone waits. So my question again is, what are you waiting for? What is it, really, that you're waiting for? So sometimes I have to think, what if we focus less on the wait times, on reducing it, but more on what we're looking toward, what we're waiting for? What if our focus is not on the distance to what we want, but just on what we want? How would that change things? What would that look like? You know what I would call that? When you focus on what you're looking toward, it's called hope. Hope. I asked you before what you're waiting for. That's really not the question. We ask our students after their first week, what are you hopeful for? We did this video thing with them. After their first week, what are you hopeful for? You see, something happens when we change that. You see, you can measure the type of waiting you are living with by the amount of hope that you have. Because there's a waiting that involves hope, which is the Old Testament word that it's trying to evoke. And there's the waiting the rest of us do in the doctor's office. There's that type of waiting. So let's look at another word. I said that there is a word that this type of waiting, kavah, to wait, is tied to a type of waiting, which is hope. Well, guess what? There's another Hebrew word you can learn. And it's tied to waiting, and that word, we can look at it, is tikva. Now, what's cool about this word tikva, in the Hebrew, you write left to right, you write right to left. The word on the left that's all in white, that's kavah. That's to wait. All they did was add a tav, one letter, to the beginning of the word, and it's tikva. And tikva is the Hebrew word to hope. Because you see in the Old Testament and in Scripture, waiting is to hoping. You're not just waiting around. You're waiting expectantly, right? And so there's a verse we can look at, right? In the Bible, they're tied together. So Isaiah 40, you guys know this verse, 31. Those who wait for the Lord, right? Wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Do you see the hope? Like he's saying, those that wait on the Lord. How is it in the midst of your life, in the midst of all that's wrong, all that's not what you want it to be, how can you be filled with renewed strength? How can you run and not be weary? How can you walk and not faint in the midst of what you are living with and dealing with? It all depends on the type of hope that you have. What are you hoping for? Jeremiah 29:11. I always have ambivalent feelings about this. It's kind of like when Paul talks about that very quoted verse, I can do all things through Christ. You know, I can do all things through Christ, and we shout it out. This is a guy who just before said, I've already learned how to be content, whether I have food or I don't, whether I have money or I don't, whether I'm being persecuted or I'm not. He, in that condition, says, I found the secret. I can do all that. We want to just take that to like, I can achieve anything I want. It's, I can endure anything. When you bring up, let's pray for Afghanistan, or you bring about COVID, it is in the midst of that that we can say, I can do all things through Christ. Right? And so this is another one. So if John 3:16 was the most popular verse for I don't know how long, there is a new one that's come up. It's Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future. The reason I always feel weird when I see that in people's homes is everybody wants to proclaim that God's going to prosper me and this is what he wants. Here's what I want to remind you. At the time Jeremiah received that prophecy, Israel had just been decimated. They had just been taken over, right? The armies had come in, had crushed their nation, had destroyed their temple. And do you know what they used to do back then? When Babylon came in and Nebuchadnezzar, when they came in and conquered a people, they would raise everything. They would just level everything. And then they would take all of the leaders, all of the wealthy, all of your brightest people. They would take the upper class, middle upper, and upper class, and they would move them to their country. So that all that is left is lower middle class and the poor living every day, waking up every day to a city that's been destroyed. Their own house of worship, the temple, destroyed. Every day they woke up wondering where their God was, how they were going to find food, how they were going to survive. And it was in the midst of this that they receive a letter from the prophet that says, oh, I know the plans I have for you. I have plans for you still. Like I'm not done with you yet. I have plans to give you a hope and a future. And so I don't know the situation with you're dealing with now. I just want you to know that no matter how bad it is, there is a type of waiting in the midst of this negativity, in the midst of all the things you can't control, where God can give you a purposeful life filled with hope. He can. In the midst of it. This is what God does. This is what God does. So Jeremiah comes along to give them a word of hope. So when we talk about hope and waiting, we see that it's a type of waiting. It's a kavah that is tied to tikva. And tikva is tied to kavah. So when the Bible says to wait, it's not like this image. It's not saying, hey, I know we live in a fallen world, everything's bad, one day I'll come and heaven will be there. So just wait around. You're in God's waiting room. That's what the life is. Kind of stinks, but I'm coming. No, God is already here. He's already working. We live in a post-resurrection world where he's already begun. And so they say eternity starts the moment you've given your life to Christ. That's when it starts. We it partially here. And what if hope does not look, or waiting does not look like this image? You're just standing in line. Eventually, at some point, God's going to make you rich, or God's going to give you something you want. You just got to wait it out. But what if the biblical image, talking about an image, is tied to this? How many of you have had children? Raise your hand. Man, first couple months, maybe the first month or so, you're afraid to tell people because you don't know is it going to work out? Is it not? But at some point, you begin, preparations. You start getting baby books and learning about it, and you're looking at, at this point, my baby's this big. And it's just this building of anticipation where you just can't wait. And you're experiencing life within you at that moment. It's not like you're just waiting for the birth and magically there's a baby. You are living with it expectantly. When God has us here, it's with purpose. In the midst of our pain, in the midst of the difficulty, God is telling us, wait on me expectantly. Wait on me expectantly. So there's these images, but did you know these words, kavah and tikva? I want to spend time on this image of tikva. In the Hebrew, I don't know what that is. Wow. In the Hebrew, a lot of the letters and words were originally pictures. So there would be a house, or there would be hands or oxen. And this tikva word, when a Jewish person heard it in their own language, they had an image associated with it. And that image is the image of a cord. Of a cord. So now I want you to think back, and we'll be wrapping this up with this story. You remember when the Israelites left Egypt, they wandered around the desert, they're going to enter the promised land. They came from this walled city called Jericho. And in Joshua chapter 2, the Israelites are about to enter the promised land, and they send 2 spies into the city. And these spies go into the city to see how we can beat this city down. And at some point, the king of that city realizes there's spies here, and they realize the spies have gone into Rahab, who lives in the wall of the city. She's a prostitute. So they go to her, and she hides them from them. And they say, give us the spies. And she said, they've left already. They did their business and they're gone. And before they leave, she makes them a promise. She has them promise her something. She says, I will save you, but please save me and every member of my family. And then they come to this idea of a cord. So we're going to read this. So she lowered them down by a cord through the window, for her house was in the wall. She was living in the wall. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless when we enter the land you have tied a cord in the window through which you let us down. So I want you to get this. This passage mentions cord twice. The first time, I said there's an image with cord. So the first time it occurs in this passage, it's the word chavel in the Hebrew. Chavel in the Hebrew just means cord. You can have several words that mean the same thing, right? But chavel will give to them a cord to bind something with. Imagine a hostage, totally bound up. So the first one, even though in English you don't see it, it just mentions the first mention of cord, it's chevel. It's a rope that binds you. A rope, it has a negative connotation to it. But the next time they talk about that she better throw that cord out, they use a different word. And the word is tikva. Tikva also means cord. What they're saying to her is, your hope for salvation, your hope for a different life is tied to something. It's tied to a promise. And you know, when Jeremiah wrote those words to a people who were living in lives that had been destroyed, and he says, I will give you a hope. In their minds, they not only heard it, they saw it. It's a cord. They remembered the story of Jericho. That our waiting is tied to hope. And it gives us an image of a cord. The problem is none of us like to wait. When I was a kid, I was telling somebody this week, I said my dream was to be like a famous guitarist, like one of the best blues guitarists. And Nisha says if I would have gotten that, like I would be the worst human possible. I would be so driven by ego, you know. But I remember I had a friend who played lots of instruments, and I remember he was really good at all of them, but specifically the cello. And I remember saying to him once, man, you have such a gift. I'd give anything to play like that. And he's like, no, you wouldn't. I could see. He kind of got upset. And I'm like, what? And he said, everybody says you have a gift. Do you know what it's like to be a kid lugging around a cello? Do you know what it's like to practice hours every day, your parents forcing you to learn an instrument? I've spent my entire life dedicated to music. I was like, oh, back off. I was just saying, you know. The truth is, I wanted to be a musician, but I wasn't willing to become a musician. I wasn't willing. What do you want to be? You know, the Israelites wanted to be the children of God. They weren't willing to become the children of God. We want to be a lot of things. But man, do we have the patience and the determination and the steadfastness to be willing to become? We want everything so quickly. Any problem that we have, we just want God to solve it, and He can, and we should pray that God heals. But do you know, if waiting was a biblical value then, would it not be a biblical value now? Do you know how many people, we may never know, one day maybe we'll know, have come to Christ because of the crisis we're having through COVID? Who, because of their mental health or their fears, are driven to looking for something, looking for hope. I want you to know, I'm not talking about forgiveness. You can be forgiven and still not be free. I'm talking about a quality of life where you're able to face your own fears with hope. Where you're able to say, this is the reality of my life, and I have no clue what's coming. But instead of just looking at the distance before I get what I'm hopeful for, I'm just fixing on that promise. That promise that God is with me now. And so instead of asking, what am I looking for, which just focus on what I don't have, it's what am I hopeful for? And I put here the art of becoming, because it's an art. This isn't something you can do on your own. You know, when an artist creates, even a secular artist, we create because we're made in God's image and He's a creator. There's something divine that happens when we create. God is in it. And I just want you to know, no matter where you are in your life at this precise moment, you can acknowledge the pain. You can sit with it. As C.S. Lewis says, squeeze all the pain that you can out of it. Get the most you can get out of it. But start focusing on, what are you hopeful for? What are you becoming? What are you willing to do now to say, God, I am willing to wait in this situation. Whether it's Mass for the next 20 years, I'm going to wait. But I'm going to wait with hope. with an expectancy that you are doing what you have always done. That's never changed. You're still out there. You're still working. You're still healing. You're still changing lives. And you're giving us hope in the midst of hopelessness. You're giving us joy in the midst of weeping. You're giving us purpose, even though I feel like my job has no significance whatsoever. That's the type of people he wants.